Good. I would like to welcome all of you to the second workshop of Agile Education and Awareness. And today I'm your host, Nchumunya Kabonda Brown, speaking to you from Ghana. And today we are privileged to have our speaker from all the way from Scotland, and his name is Martin. I'm just going to give a brief introduction of who Martin is so that you can get to know him. And the essence of this workshop today is for us to learn about Agile and DevOps and to find out if there's any connection between the two. So let me go right ahead and introduce our speaker for today, who is Martin.
Hi, how you doing?
Right, Martin, how are you today?
I am doing pretty good.
So I'm going to give the audience a brief description of yourself. If I leave anything out, please feel free to tell them what I will leave out. So Martin is a professional Scrum trainer, professional Kanban trainer, Microsoft MVP, and he has been consulting and coaching and training in DevOps and agility since 2010 and has been delivering software since 2000. Since 2008, Martin has helped many organizations and trained over 1,000+ people in 37 countries across the globe. He is based in Scotland and offers Scrum training courses with certifications all over the world. He trains and coaches Scrum Masters, product owners, developers, and organizations in their evolution towards business agility. In the pursuit of business agility for many organizations that Martin has recently worked with, Martin has provided private on-site training for many companies across the globe. So Martin, there you go.
Well, I don't think you missed anything there.
Okay.
But funnily enough, yesterday I was teaching an agile leadership class for one of my customers, and tomorrow I'm teaching a product owner class for a different group of customers. I know you've been in a couple of the classes that I've been running,
right?
And one of the things that's actually been pretty interesting is the different way that we run classes now in the live virtual space. The amount of, if you just present a PowerPoint in person, you can kind of get away with it by being charismatic, but in the live virtual space, it's just not good enough. It doesn't work anymore. People get bored very quickly. Can you imagine spending 8 hours in a meeting with a PowerPoint? So we do a lot of interactive sessions using judicious use of liberating structures that I know that you've been using as well. But today I have a little bit of PowerPoint to just, I guess, start the conversation around what is DevOps, and maybe talk about some of the things and ways that it links into agility. I would treat everything I say as an invitation to a conversation. I'm definitely not always right. I'm quite often wrong. At least that's what my wife tells me. And I just want to try and, I guess, start this conversation and what it means to you in Zambia as well is an important distinction, because my experience has been mostly in the US. I consulted for 3 years living and working in the US out of Seattle. And I've spent the last 7 years consulting out of the UK. But I do spend have in the past spent quite a bit of time in Ghana, usually 3 or 4 trips a year since 2016, speaking at conferences and working with customers. And I've been teaching a lot of classes in Nigeria as well. So I feel like I have a little bit of a connection to the world that you're in. And just the differences. I think it's something that I've always found super interesting is teaching in lots of different places in the world and learning about the differences in the way people approach ideas, or even just the reaction you get when you tell people stuff. Like if you go to Norway and you present something that's super exciting, you will be greeted with stony-faced silence, because that's how Norwegians express their excitement. Whereas you go in the US and people are all excited and talking about things. So I'm interested, because this is the first thing I have done in Zambia, what the difference is and how things go. So I'm looking forward to lots of questions.
Sure, please go ahead.
So let me share my screen just for a moment. Is that and I'll make sure I do it right. Where's the there it is. It's the big green button, isn't it? That's why I'm confused. Yes. I am not a common Zoom user. I don't use it very often. So if I do, it takes me a minute sometimes to find the buttons that I need. So I guess I wanted to start off with a little bit of what is DevOps, because you will hear lots of people talk about it in different ways. I like a gentleman that I respect greatly called Donovan Brown, is the head of the DevOps practice at Microsoft. And I like his definition of what DevOps is, but that doesn't mean it's the only one. Okay, lots of people treat it differently. And I actually find a lot that depends who you speak to, whether agility is part of DevOps or DevOps is part of agility, right? It just depends who you speak to and the angle they're coming, the lens they're looking at that story through. And I think both are perfectly valid. And in fact, I want to get to a very specific point there. You've probably maybe seen job titles around DevOps, like a DevOps engineer, maybe, or a DevOps manager. I don't really know what those things are. But in general, you hear people talking about it being automation, doing things faster and smaller, getting things into production, and just collaboration between developer and operations. I mean, it's kind of in the name, DevOps, developer and operations. But I think it's more than that and less than that. Okay, and I'm being deliberately vague. Chi-Chi did say that I was an agilist. We're always deliberately vague, because it helps us wiggle out of being locked down into something being the right way. But let me share a little video with you. This video is in two parts. I want to show you these two ideas. The first video is from both of them are from racing, right? Car racing. And the first one is from Indianapolis in the 1950s. And it's a pit stop. Okay, so that's your quintessential interacting with your operations team doing some kind of activity. And the second one is from the 2013 Melbourne Formula One, and just to see the difference between the two. Okay. Let me know if you can hear the audio when it comes on.
But Holland comes in for a pit stop. Time to refuel and change tires. Lou Moore himself changes the tires. Only 4 crew members, including the driver, are allowed to work on the car. It's a tense time. Holland stays
Oh,
in his seat,
my fault.
anxious to get away. Let's watch. The tires are changed at last. A crewman polishes the windshield as Holland moves away just 67 seconds after he stopped.
That was 67 seconds for a pit stop. Hopefully you took note of some of the struggles that team had. Now we're going to take a look at the Melbourne in 2013. So less than 50 years later. Did anybody notice that was a little bit quicker? Yeah, much quicker, and for a variety of reasons, right? What might you have noticed in that story? First off, you might have noticed there was more people involved in the process. There was more people actively doing things. Part of this was due to the higher degrees of organization that they could have during the pit stop. In the 1950s, there were rules around how many people you could have involved, whereas now there's not, right? But the rules were for safety, as in having too many people there might have resulted in people getting run over. So the increase in number of people that all know what they're doing. And I don't think of this as the people, okay? When we're thinking about the DevOps mindset, we're thinking about automation, right? So the automation here is everybody there on the 2013 Melbourne pit stop had a very specific job. They all did that one job. So you can see, if you were spotting in the old one, they had to use a sledgehammer to get the tires off. And one person was responsible for changing the tires, and he changed the first one and then the second one. Did you see how long it took to refuel the car in the first one? Did anybody see that? They were well finished refueling about 30 seconds in. They hadn't even changed the first wheel. Anybody notice how quickly it took to refuel in the second one? They actually didn't refuel, but they changed all 4 tires in, I don't know, I think it's like two and a half seconds. They changed the tires, and it's very quick. So the difference there is automation, how quickly things happen. And you can even see, do you see at the back of the car there are actually 2 people with a jack. There is this gentleman here who has the jack under the car, and then there's somebody behind with a second jack. At some point, that jack must have failed. So they've got a backup waiting there ready, and they've got something holding the jack ready to get it in place. Right?
Right.
That's automation. That's thinking about what could possibly happen and how do we mitigate around it. Right? And the refueling was really, really important as well. So in the 1950s, the biggest impediment to getting through the pit stop was changing the tires. Right? Absolutely, it was changing the tires. That took 67 seconds to change the tires, and everything else could be done inside of that time. But as we moved into the 80s and 90s in Formula One, the tires were getting changed much more quickly, right? In fact, they could change whole brake assemblies. They could do all kinds of awesome things. And the biggest impediment was then refueling, right? How to get as much fuel into the car as possible. Because here, I think it took about 30 seconds to do the refueling. We saw them stop about halfway through, right? Once we fix the tires and we're doing them in a few seconds, then refueling is the biggest problem. So how do we deal with that? What might you do in that space? Well, one of the things they tried was, let's make the fuel hose bigger, right? So instead of pumping, I don't know, a gallon a second, we pump 10 gallons a second because the hose is bigger. Did anybody follow Formula One in the 80s or 90s? Some interesting things happened because of that. If you followed it, you'll know there was a lot of fires in the pit stops because they were trying to push the fuel too fast through the pipe. There was too much fuel going through it at once. And if there was the slightest mistake, fuel went everywhere. Formula One cars are hot, lots of explosions and fires. So they had to restrict how fast the fuel flowed in order to prevent fires. So fuel was still the biggest impediment. So what did they do? They made the engines more efficient. You'll notice in the second pit stop, they didn't refuel the car at all. They didn't refuel it. So let me show you again, see if you can see. No refueling. They made it so the cars have to refuel less often. So that's coming at it from a completely different angle. Don't put fuel in faster. Do it differently. And this is the definition of DevOps that I kind of like. DevOps is the union of people, processes, and products to enable the continuous delivery of value to your end users. This is from Donovan Brown, who's one of the lead engineers in the DevOps space at Microsoft. So we're developing products, right? That's where the core practices around agility kind of live, is in that developing products. But then we also have to deliver the products somewhere and operate them while they're there. Those are practices that are part of the Agile space, and Agile is part of the DevOps space. So the question at the start, which came first, they're both right. They're two sides of the same coin, agility and DevOps. Agile is a way of working to enable the continuous delivery of value to our end users. We've got transparency, inspection, and adaption. DevOps helps us do that process faster and more effectively by bringing in a mindset. And the DevOps mindset is a little bit more specific to the software world than agility is, right? But it's bringing in those ideas from lean, from the lean manufacturing process, because ultimately from developing the idea, right? Once you've made the idea, getting it into production as quickly as possible is a production line. That should all be automated. So DevOps, you could also say DevOps is really just about automation, right? I'm not paying it the service it needs, right? DevOps as I'm going to rephrase that because I think I'm paying it a little bit of disservice. The DevOps mindset is bigger than that. The DevOps mindset is about building the smallest thing possible, bringing the people together, the processes together, and the tools together so that you can get things into production as quickly as possible, understand and monitor what's happening in production, the changes that you're making, how they're affecting production, and creating that feedback loop. But if you talk to somebody who is in the Agile mindset, they think of DevOps as, you know, there's a set of practices that help us deliver stuff faster. Agile is the whole thing, right? And then there's a bunch of DevOps practices that help us deliver quicker, automation and continuous delivery pipelines and those kind of things. But if you talk to the DevOps person, DevOps is the mindset, and then some Agile practices help us build the software, and then our DevOps practices help us deliver the software. That's why I'm saying that they are in effect the same thing, and we need to all be friends with it, but you'll find there's a little bit of conflict in that space. Does that make sense for you as well, Chi-Chi?
Of course it does.
So just a a couple of things that are interesting. This is from the DORA, the State of DevOps report in 2008. And it shows that the DevOps top performers are doing things a little bit differently than the average organizations. So the DevOps top performers, people who focus on DevOps, right? And I would say the same is true for agility, right? DevOps and agility, put that together. DevAgile, maybe we could call it DevAgile or AgDev, I don't know, whatever we're going to call it, right? But if you focus on these practices, whatever you call them, you're 50% more likely to be spend 50% of your time on new features. If you don't, you only spend 30% of your time on new features on average. I'd rather be spending 50% of my money on net new features than 30%. And part of that is because we're saving time by automating a bunch of stuff we shouldn't have to do ourselves. Make things faster, make things slicker, make things easier for the team so they can focus on using their brain to solve problems rather than doing stuff that they do 100 times. If you do it 100 times, it should be automated. And if you look at the customer support work, on average, teams spend about 15% of the time supporting customers. DevOps teams only spend 5%. That's because we get better at automating away a lot of those processes. We focus on building higher quality product. The faster you have to deliver, right? The faster you have to do something, the slicker it has to be. Right? You need those wheels to fit on the car every time. It's not okay if they're. I've actually seen footage from an old pit stop where they had to use the new wheel that they were putting on didn't actually fit the thing because it was just, you know, the lower quality in the manufacturing process. It didn't actually fit, and they hammered that thing on with 2 sledgehammers. They made it fit, right? But is that high quality? Does that come with a lot of risk because we've kind of tried to shove that together? I was trying to find it. I have a story of an organization that really failed to deliver. So let me quickly see if there's any questions at this point already. I will happily answer them while I find this content.
I will just
yes.
read, there's a comment in the chat box.
Okay.
From one of the participants, and it says, I always struggle to understand DevOps as being a mindset or a set of practices because it's always been reduced to automation like CI and DI pipelines. And so maybe you can comment on that as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think the same is true for agility as well, right? If you just reduce it to its practices, you end up with what I call mechanical Scrum, right? Or mechanical Agile. You're just following the steps and you're not really getting the benefits because nobody's changed their mind. We're still thinking in the waterfall long delivery mindset. You know, we're still thinking that we're going to have an operations team that's separate from a development team that's separate from a test team, or even a marketing team that's separate from a sales team, right? These constructs come from the management practices that were developed during the Industrial Revolution to manage factory workers. When we were dealing with simple work, we didn't have robots and automation, and we had to automate using people. So we had to figure out, how do we control people enough? And DevOps and agility is 2 angles of unpicking some of those traditional management practices to try and make it more effective. I don't know, did that answer the question? I might have.
I believe so, yeah. Yeah, he says
so
thanks.
I agree, it's hard. Yeah, it's super hard. this is a good, I like this example. I think this is a pretty good example of why DevOps is important, and not just agility, right? So the way I think about it is DevOps brings some of the technical excellence that we need to deliver stuff into production. Right? I know that sounds like I'm saying it's just automation. I definitely don't mean it that way. Right? But this is a good story. This is a company called the Knight Capital Group. Right? And the Knight Capital Group was listed on the New York Stock Exchange, so a public company. And they had about $400 million in assets at the start of this eventful day that I'm going to talk about. So they're a financial services organization, right? And they decided to add a new order handling feature to their product. So creating like child orders or whatever it was. And they're going to replace a bunch of old code with new code, right? But they've got an old system. It's got 9 years of unused code in the system. Okay, if you look at there's a report from the Standish Group in Boston called the Chaos Report. It's kind of released each year. And one of the findings that they found was that 65% of the features that you build in your digital services product will not be used by your customers. Right, so that's just dead code sitting there that you have to maintain, support. It costs you money, but nobody's actually using it. Part of that is because we don't have very good telemetry on our products to understand how it's being used. We just accept that the customer says that they need it, whether they actually use it or not. That can, customers will lie as well. So there's 9 years of unused code. And they had a particular flag for turning on this feature to activate this new code, and they repurposed an existing flag. There's an existing flag in the system, like a little switch in the system that they repurposed. And what happened was, at deployment, their technician, right, who doesn't necessarily understand the product, they're just following a script, deployed to 7 of the 8 servers. What do you think would happen? Think about, as a developer, or if you are developers, or as a organization with software that you use, do your developers think about what would happen if this happened in production? I doubt they do. Right, so 7 of the 8 servers. And then they went live. And the system didn't work. But remember, this is financial services. They started losing nearly $200,000 a minute while they were down. $200,000 a minute. And, they tried to fix it, right? But they couldn't figure out that it was because one of the servers wasn't updated, because everything looked okay. Right? They tested this server, everything's working, they could connect to the APIs and stuff, but the whole process wasn't working end to end. Guess what happened? By the end of the day, right, they'd lost $460 million and had to file for bankruptcy. A small error resulted in the total loss of that company and all the jobs at that company. Doesn't seem like a big thing. A lowly technician deploys to 7 of the 8 servers instead of 8. He skipped 1 step on a manual deployment. What would be the impact on your organization if a critical piece of software that you rely on was down for a day? How quickly could your team fix it? And are they fixing it with sticky tape and super glue, right? They're getting out the duct tape and trying to patch it back together. Or are they actually be able to fix the problem and re-release? That's the important thing. Is the fix just as dangerous as the fault? This idea that you think, especially from long deployment teams, so they're doing 1 or 2 years of deployments, they talk about this idea of a hot fix, right? Every time I hear a team talk about hot fixes, I cringe, because hot fix, very definition of hot fix, means we're going to try and fix it and ship something that might fix it, but we've not really tested it properly. That's what a hot fix is. I don't ever want a hot fix. I want the problem fixed and then re-release the product, which means my team has to be able to re-release the product very quickly, very, very quickly. How quickly can your team release your product? How quickly can you go from them making a code change to it being in production? They make that fix, how quick? In this case, it was very slow because they had to manually go check all of the systems, so they ended up losing a lot of money. Now, actually, we know a lot because we can, because they're a public company, we can see the SEC filing for bankruptcy. They have to say why they're filing for bankruptcy and what the problem was. And even though they didn't have anybody looking over that technician's shoulder, nobody realized that some code that wasn't meant to, remember, they repurposed a switch. They thought that code, the developers who repurposed the switch thought that other code had been taken out of the system, but it hadn't. So they activated a bunch of stuff that shouldn't have been activated as well. And they had no procedures to review it. Think about how important your product is to your organization. But for most organizations, we are all software companies now. Right? We are all software companies. We cannot function without the software that helps us function. So all that software, it's absolutely critical to your organization that is high quality, that it's able to be delivered quickly and successfully, so that if something does go wrong, you can fix it quickly. If somebody's asking, are we fixing our systems with? I thought that was you, Chichi.
I have a couple of questions, and I'm thinking I'm gonna let you know once you're done.
I'm pretty close to done with that story, but I would say that how do you get better at doing something? Right, you got to do it all the time. You're not going to get good at releasing your software if you only do it once every 2 years, or even if you only do it once every 6 months, or even if you only do it once every 3 months. Right? I want a team able to do that every day. Every day, I should be able to release my product. What happens if you've got a product that is public facing and it gets hacked? How quickly can you change all the passwords? I'm going to be working with an organization that I just went to their website to check them out, and their website has been down for 8 days because they had a hacking attempt, and it's taking them longer than 8 days to change all the passwords so that all the systems still function. Imagine if people go to the public website for your company and you have to have a notice up saying we're down because somebody tried to hack us and we're still trying to get it back up. 8 days. The Azure DevOps team at Microsoft that built a product called Azure DevOps, which is for software teams, right? They have millions of users on their product across the world, and they are the expression is roll the authentication, right? So you change the authentication. They change every deployment, changes every encryption key and every password. So they refresh all of the encryption keys, all of the passwords, everything whenever they do a deployment. So what happens if they get hacked? They push the deploy button. And an automated system in a structural and designed manner fixes the problem. You also then need to figure out how you got hacked and how you make sure you don't get hacked next time, because you may have had an outage, you may have had lost data, yeah? But I know when I roll that system that we're back up. What would happen in your organization with your software? Yeah, I worked in Merrill Lynch for 3 years, right? And we did a disaster recovery. Have you ever done a disaster recovery? Have you ever been part of a disaster recovery exercise? Merrill Lynch flew me and all of my colleagues down to London. We operated inside an office that was specially designed for this test, where they would effectively turn off one of their data centers. No, so disconnect it from the internet, and then we would see how long it took us to get everything back up. Right? And guess what? Nobody got anything back up. And you know why nobody got anything back up? Because authentication failed. So nobody could even if my system was up that I had to manage and support, nobody could log into it because authentication was down. Active Directory was broken. And guess what? That had happened in the previous 3 attempts to do the same thing. They're not doing it often enough. They don't have a resilient system. They are down if that happens for real. How are you going to support that in your organization? How are you going to facilitate creating that system that is resilient? Yeah, so a good example of this is actually the Chaos Monkey. Right, there's a piece of software at Netflix called a Chaos Monkey that was built originally by an intern, right, but now is used throughout the organization. And the Chaos Monkey is a piece of software that has the keys to everything, all of the infrastructure, all of the networks, all of the routers, everything, and it randomly breaks stuff. So it will go and turn off servers. It will go and delete movies from servers, right? And you as a developer's job is to make sure that doesn't affect the user's viewing experience. Those things are going to happen all the time in the real world. Yeah, internet connections fail, backbones between countries have glitches. How do you make sure? Thank you. There's the Netflix GitHub IO Chaos Monkey link. Thank you for that. But it's the idea of the Chaos Monkey. In London, there was a flood and all of the data centers in London lost power. Only one data center stayed up, and that was Rackspace's main data center. Do you know why it stayed up? Because every month, randomly, but every month, the CEO or the owner of the data center would go into the power room, turn the key, and pull the external power every month. So the backups have been tested. The failover to generators has been tested every month, at least every month. Every other data center went down because they'd never tested their backup procedure. They just expected it to work. That's an assumption, and that's a very dangerous assumption. So I'm going to take, there's a anonymous question there that I can see. There's one open question. Please go and add more in the Q&A section if you have questions. So the question is, from your experience, what are some of the things that you have had to do to win over management with this, I guess, Dev Agile, when they are relatively stuck in their old ways? You need to focus on the risk to the business, right? What is the risk of these bad things happening, right? That's one thing. And the other thing is that I do a presentation around complexity of work to help them understand the world in which we exist in product development, right? So although DevOps is really for product delivery, right? That's our optimization for the product delivery space. If you look at the mindset as a whole, it encompasses product development and product delivery. And in the product development world, when we're building something that doesn't yet exist, right, that's complex. And one of the characteristics of that type of work is that we know less at the beginning than we discover by doing it.
Right.
If we fundamentally understand less than half of the problems that might occur, traditional management practices are not equipped to deal with that. They're just not equipped to deal with that, right? In traditional management practices, you mitigate risk with more control, right? You use a plan-driven approach. You create a plan, and then you manage to that plan, and you manage for deviations from that plan. That assumes that there's a lot smaller deviation that's possible. When we're building a product that doesn't exist yet, it's more than 50%. You can't manage for that. It's just impossible, right? It's a disaster waiting to happen. So what we do, and for example, you can use Scrum as an empirical process control system to create transparency by delivering a working product at the end of every sprint, right? That's how we mitigate risk in the product development world, is we deliver something that works. So you'll see that a lot, even Toyota, for example, who pioneered lean manufacturing with the Toyota production system. They use empirical practices to design a car. They use lean production systems to deliver the car, right? In that world, for us, for software, we potentially use DevOps practices and DevOps mindsets to control around delivering that product production as quickly as possible and maintaining high quality, which means that bleeds into the product development as well. But then in the product development space and managing the work that we're doing, we're going to use something that's an empirical process control system in order to manage that flow. And what that generally looks like is across the board, we can use Kanban practices, right? The Kanban metrics to help optimize the flow through our entire system from ideation all the way to delivery. And then we've got a piece that is product development, which is governed quite often in organizations by Scrum, right? About 80% of software teams are doing, or they say they're doing Scrum. You know as well as I do that they're not doing Scrum very well, but they say that they're doing Scrum. And then we have a production line, right? Which is from the code committed to the repository to it ending up in production, our product ending up in production. That's our production line. So we can apply lean manufacturing techniques there. A lot of that has made its way into DevOps, right? And we use product delivery techniques. And then we've also got that piece, which is product ideation, right? Product discovery. How do we discover what it is that we need to build? Because if you look at the data from the Standish group as well, we are at 35% of requirements will change over the life of a project. 65% of the stuff we build won't be used by our customers. So we built it, but it's the wrong stuff. It didn't change, but it's still wrong. What does that look like on a cost chart, right? 65%. So if we spend $1 million on building something, we only get $350,000 of value. That kind of sucks, doesn't it? Guess what? We lose 50% of our time for ineffective communication. Oh, damn it. We've only got like, what's that? $175-ish thousand left out of that $1 million. Oh, and 30% of our requirements will change. What's that got left? That's like, I don't know, $120,000 left. That doesn't sound like a good return on investment, does it? That's what happens when we use traditional management practices to try and manage this incredibly complex, ever-changing world of building software. And it actually applies across the organization as well. It's not just about the software, but it just changes so much, so quickly, so little understood. So that's what I talk about to try and convince them that the old ways are bad. Yeah, they have to understand what it is we're trying to manage. What are some of biggest clients, just to show up. You mean my biggest clients, I think, to show management that there needs to be a paradigm shift in operations. The biggest organizational shift that I know of is at Microsoft. Microsoft was a waterfall organization 8 years ago, and now it's an agile organization. They deliver continuously production. 8 years ago, they were maybe deploying to servers a couple of times a month, right? Today, they do over 200,000 deployments a day to servers, right? And that's all types of environments, but that's a big shift. That's more deployments per day than the number of engineers that they have. That's every commit into a repo ending up in an environment where you can test it, right? If not all the way to production. Many teams are moving towards continuous delivery. And if you're moving towards continuous delivery, that means that you're, sorry, I've got a visitor. That means that your development teams, right? They need to own operational infrastructure. There is no regulatory requirement that requires your operations people to be different people than your development people. It's a misinterpretation of a lot of the internal regulations that encourage that type of behavior, right? You don't need that. You just need a separation of concerns, which are different. For most continuous delivery teams, the developers don't have permission to the production servers because they make a change in the code, they hit the deploy button, and it's all automated, right? So they don't need permission to those environments to deploy to them. You approach the whole problem differently. Remember the fuel problem. Make the engine more efficient. Don't try and fill up with more fuel. Make the engine more efficient. So you do more with less, right? So Microsoft is the biggest example. I have a list of clients on my website, but I deal with organizations that are professional services organizations delivering software to their customers. I work with healthcare organizations, with the Ghana Police Service, right, who wanted to use Scrum and Agile techniques to change their organization. That's completely out with the whole DevOps space. I've worked. Oh man, every industry everywhere. Banking are moving. In fact, the largest employer of Agile people, the two largest employers for Agile people in Scotland is the Royal Bank of Scotland, which is the 5th biggest bank in the world. They are soaking up all of the Scrum Masters, and BP, British Petroleum, who are involved in a massive Agile transformation at the moment, and a number of my colleagues have been hired by them. These are big organizations that are realizing that they have to operate like small organizations to be successful, right? This is why small organizations can come into a market or even just, make a new company, and they disrupt the existing market. My bank used to be Royal Bank of Scotland, but they sucked, and Monzo doesn't, which is an internet bank, right? I've spoken to Chichi about this before. Monzo, just as an example, if I want to create a bank account, brand new bank account at Royal Bank of Scotland, which my ex tried to do recently for the kids, right? She gave up. She gave up trying to create a bank account for the kids because it was too hard. You had to go into a branch, but the branches were closed. You had to provide all of this different levels of identification and verification, right? When I wanted a Monzo bank account, I installed the app on my phone. I recorded a video of me saying, my name is Martin Hinshelwood and I'd like to open a Monzo bank account. And I uploaded a picture of my passport. And 15 minutes later, I had a bank account with bank account numbers and I could transfer money in and out. Honestly, it was that easy. Every so often, I go to try and do something new or add my Monzo bank to a new phone, and I have to repeat part of that procedure, right? Because they want to re-identify me just in case, like your in-person bank sometimes does, but in a much easier, slicker way that still complies with exactly the same banking regulations. They just started without the baggage that those organizations brought, without the bureaucracy enshrined in their process. Yeah. So lots of big organizations. It's change or die, by the way, right? If you don't change, somebody will come in and disrupt your market. Where is Blockbuster? Where is Kodak? Right? These are organizations that had the chance to adapt their market, didn't for whatever business reasons they thought was a good idea, and then it was a bad choice and they disappeared. So I think I've answered that one. We're using Azure DevOps, and I have struggled to shift the culture and mindset of stakeholders to take ownership and appreciate the benefits of Scrum Kanban, but risk is something I never brought up yet. Talk about risk. Talk about risk. Talk about the software you create is an organizational asset, right? Think about that. How much are they investing in it, and how much value are we actually getting that we can use with our customers or use internally? Is it the same thing? Get telemetry into your application. If you're using Azure DevOps, you're probably already using other Azure services, right? Application Insights is a fantastic product for integrating that and getting that data, that telemetry on how people are actually using your product in a very easy way. And that works across any software on any platform, but it's just a good way of analyzing some of that telemetry. So I've answered that one. Oh,
Missed the one on top, Martin. The
one at the top.
Who is responsible for ensuring the team is keeping within the DevOps?
Who's responsible for ensuring the team is keeping within the DevOps Agile practices? Is it solely the project manager, product manager, or the CTO? Okay. And is there a team size requirement? We've got to start thinking differently, right, from the ground up. Anytime somebody says, ensure that people are following a process or keep within the practices, right? If we impose ourselves on people, we won't get their best. We need to create an environment as leaders inside of organizations. It is our job to create an environment within which the smart, highly educated people that we have hired are able to organize around solving that problem themselves, right? That is ultimately the key, right? Pushing responsibility down the organization. Go have a read of Turn This Ship Around by David Marquette. There's also a YouTube video. Or The Greater Goal. If you look at these stories, the overriding thing is you have to get your people to buy into the vision and goals of your product and let them organize around it. You don't hire uneducated people anymore. That's industrial revolution thinking, where we had lots of highly uneducated workforce. Now we've got highly educated workforce, and we need to approach it differently, right? So that's really important. And team size, whatever works, right? Whatever works for you is what is a good team size. Most teams I see are 6 to 8 people in an individual team, cross-functional team. But I've worked with teams in organizations that are 12, 13 people and they've worked okay, right? If it's not working for you, the team might be too big, right? It depends on your organization, your culture, all kinds of things. What performance metrics can be used to track the Dev Agile practices? I use the Kanban metrics. If you look up the Kanban guide, if you Google the Kanban guide, you should find some metrics that will help you with your continuous flow. To the comment, if you've got 78 people, you just break up into smaller cross-functional teams that are able to deliver value. That's how you scale to that level. So I would look at the Kanban metrics. I would also look at the EBM guide, the evidence-based management guide from scrum.org, that talks about how you can monitor organizations at a higher level as well as at the project level. So the Kanban metrics at the team level, and the EBM metrics at the organizational level, right? We talked about them in the class we were in, Chi-Chi. So I'm sure links for all of the things that I mentioned will be posted in the chat at some point, or if people want to go find that themselves. So that's, and performance is the wrong word. Okay, performance is one of those traditional words for managing factory workers, where we need more performance out of people because the outcomes are known. Yeah, but in our world of product development, building new products, the outcomes are not known. We don't know what the outcome is going to be yet. So performance is the wrong word. Think effectiveness. How do we make the team more effective? Right? Butts on seats does not make an effective team. Just because your butt's on a seat doesn't mean you're being effective. Your teams could work less and be more effective. Right? You have to figure out what effective means for your organization. That's the job of a Scrum Master, by the way, help your teams become more effective. Besides Azure boards, what are some tools you found useful? I mean, Jira can be useful. I don't like it, but I know lots of people do. But even stickies on a whiteboard is the traditional model. I use Mural a lot. Mural or Miro. I know, Jira, I totally agree with you. First you have a problem, you solve it with Jira, and now nobody knows what the problem is. But I do like Azure DevOps, but only because I'm a Azure DevOps MVP. I've worked with it for many years. I've seen it evolve and helped it evolve. So it does it the way I want to do it, which probably is a lot of bias. So don't take me on for that. But even just using Mural or Miro to create boards and move your tickets on the board, where it really is just a ticket and it's not a digital system that's analyzing your work, that could be helpful. Whatever you can do to emulate the tactile in-person experience that provides the best results, right? So stickies on a whiteboard provide the best experience for the team, right? But we can't do that necessarily just now, depending on your level of lockdown. So have something that equates as closely to that as possible. Besides, okay, and then if I miss one, let me know. I think I've answered that one. I've answered that one. And I've answered that one. Okay, so in an early stage startup environment where you have 1 or 2 developers working on a product on a very thin budget, trying to balance building product features and debugging issues, V's, automation things is always a difficult decision. We see the need for automation because now and then we run into issues that automation could have solved, but we don't have time for automation or time in the budget. My advice is you're wrong, automate everything, right? I would much rather my team spent time on its own effectiveness. I'm actually quoting Satya Nadella here. I would much rather my team spent time on its own effectiveness than on building new features. The more effective your team is, you will get more features. If you make the team more efficient, the whole team is more efficient, more effective at delivering. Right? So folk, do the automation, right? Because it will bite you in the ass later. You might go quicker just now, but you'll have a whole bunch of work piling up for later when you get into your testing phase, when you get into your delivery phase. There are plenty of automation tools out there that can make some of this world easy, and you need to start with that model. Because if you go and try and retrofit automation onto your product, it is going to be a nightmare because the developers won't have built it with automation in mind. If you build it with automation in mind from the start, automate everything. Okay. I would go so far as to say all technical debt in your product, whether that's a lack of automation, right, or poor quality code, or lack of code reviews, or whatever unit tests, you know, any technical debt is a risk to your business. your startup may fail because of poor quality. Right? Better build less at higher quality than more at lower quality. But also, rules are for the guidance of wise people and the obedience of fools, right? I've seen many products that are really poor quality do really well in the market, and then they're able to build quality in later. You have to make that call and that decision, right? So as a small startup, automate everything would be my default approach, except where it inhibits our ability to do business. And then maybe I'm a little bit more lax, but I know that I still have to do that work later. The work still needs done. So I think I've answered that one.
I've got 3 more questions that came through the registration, Martin.
Perfect.
And the first one is, we want to practically adopt Agile without too much friction from our natural way of handling projects.
Yep.
Looking forward to how?
You can't. That's the really simple answer, right? You cannot. Think of it this way. In order to get the value that you want from agility, you're going to have to, and I'm going to use maybe some extreme examples. It's a dial, not a Boolean proposition, but you're going to have to continuously deliver your product to production, continuously get feedback from those users, continually experiment in your product from an ideation standpoint. You know, what's the smallest thing my team could go build to test whether my assumption that this piece of the product will provide value? What's the smallest experiment I can get my team to build? They go build it. We look at some data to decide whether we've had the effect that we want. And then we decide whether we want to build more of that or do less of that, right? That cycle, and as quickly as possible, depending on your organizational planning horizon, right? How tight do you need that to be? I can't imagine a scenario where you can achieve that and you haven't changed everything in your organization, right? So much so that I know of an organization that the main part of the organization refused to change. So the IT part of the organization pitched a venture capitalist outcome where the CTO took the entire engineering department, set up a brand new company that didn't have to operate under the parent company's practices that they didn't want to change, and was hugely successful because they were then able to do it the way they needed to do it for software. But the main part of the organization that was nothing to do with software didn't have to change the way they do things because they didn't want to. Right? If you don't want to change, don't change. But also what I said before is true. Change or die. Yeah. Adapt or die, maybe better. I like that. Martin's affirming everything I've unsuccessfully pitched to senior management. There are MBAs, right, are our biggest problem, because MBAs have been taught traditional management practices that were developed during the Industrial Revolution to manage factory workers. There are even MBAs coming out today are still taught those practices as default because there's lots of work still in that category. But the knowledge working world is growing. The traditional working world is shrinking. How many of you are managing people who work in factories now? I bet nobody on this call is managing people who work on factories. That might be a little bit harsh, but I bet it's very few. We're managing people, knowledge workers. We can't just replace a person with somebody else and they fill that gap because that person was unique with unique knowledge and skills. The old practices don't work anymore. Right? They actually haven't worked for a long time and they never really worked that well in the first place, but that's a much bigger conversation around. If you want to go look up a gentleman called Frederick Winston Taylor and the scientific management method, there's a lot of really good stories and things around there, as well as his good friend Henry Gantt, which you can imagine what Henry Gantt created. And Henry Gantt was back in the 1905, 1908 type of time frame, right? That's where the Gantt chart came from. Managing factory workers. We can't manage the type of work we do now with that method. Is there any other questions? You said there was a number of them.
I've got it with me. So the second one is, how do we get managers to agree with parts of DevOps and Scrum that threaten their comfort zone?
Yeah, so you send them to my Agile leadership training. That's what's one way. So there's a transition from management to leadership, right? We're turning organizations inside out. So in a traditional organization, you have a hierarchy, right? The CEO sets direction, tells a bunch of managers what to do. Those managers tell the workers what to do, right? Because the workers are uneducated. And I'm not saying you are, I'm saying that's the mindset from that model, that hierarchical model. Top knows best, bottom gets told what to do, right? And then I worked in Merrill Lynch and there was 16 people between me at the very bottom with no direct reports and the CEO of the company, 16 levels of management in there, right? But in the new model, the customer is on the outside. Our teams, our delivery teams are providing services to those customers. It might not just be software, right? I could create a delivery team that included marketing and sales, right? That we're delivering something different to customers. If you were a mortgage company, you might be delivering mortgage packages. So maybe you need an actuary and sales and marketing in that team that's creating that thing you're delivering to your customers. It's not necessarily software, right? So they're on the outside and leadership is on the inside, creating an environment within which all of those teams can be effective. What is increasing the effectiveness of our teams? Do more of that. What is decreasing the effectiveness? Do less. Right? Have you ever seen that there's an animated GIF of a train going along? It's like from an old movie, and there's things on the track, and the guy is standing on the front of the train trying to get rid of usually it's called fixing bugs in production, right? And he manages to get one of the beams that's sitting on top of the track, and then there's another one sitting, so he throws this one at that one to flip it off. That's we got to change everything to get slicker and faster and better at dealing stuff. Agility is about being able to adapt to business opportunities as they arise. If your organization has, we could have done something, but we weren't fast enough and it just went off and somebody else solved that problem. Well, that's too late, isn't it? How do we become faster? How do we become more nimble? How do we bring back that entrepreneurial spirit that built your company in the first place, right? But banks find this hugely difficult because most banks started with bureaucracy because they were offshoots of other banks, right? But think about the first bank ever. It didn't start with bureaucracy. They had to build that. Unfortunately, that was the Royal Bank of Scotland. I'm sorry about that. Oh my goodness me, somebody asked for my favorite books on this subject. I don't know, I think I'd need to make a list. I really like The Greater Goal, although it's a little bit old now. That's a good story. The DevOps Handbook, right? Continuous Delivery, Jess Hubble. I'm trying to think as well from a leadership perspective too. Oh, good grief. I've actually probably got, because I'm teaching that class.
As you're looking, Martin, let me send you through the last question because we seem to be running out of time.
Oh no, that's cool. Yeah, I have a hard stop at the top of the half hour. Top of the half hour, is that even a word? Close enough. Yeah.
So the third question is, how can you help us to be connected as students starting up developers to find interns around town?
I think that's a resourcing question. I think that's a question around how do we hire the right people?
Right.
I that's the flavor I got from that.
Yes.
And yeah, it's really hard to hire the right people. I would point you at a book called The Ideal Team Player by Patrick Lencioni, which is skills we can teach people, right? If they don't know agile practices, we can teach them that. If they don't know DevOps, we can teach them that. If they don't know how to write a particular coding thing we use, we can teach them that. The hard thing to find is people with humility, hunger, and people smart, right? They're the hard people to find. So you need to create almost a pipeline into your organization of how do we filter for the people that we need that have humility. They're going to work together. They're not in it for their, fame, right? That's humility. They're don't let their ego get in the way. They're hungry. They're self-motivated. They're trying to figure out how to solve problems. They take responsibility and accountability for things that are within their authority to do, and create a sustainable commitment to deliver value inside your organization. And people smart is that level of empathy that is required to engage in conversations, with your customers, to really understand what they need and ask good questions. Those types of people are gold dust, and that's who we need in the knowledge working world. Unfortunately, the current education system is not designed to encourage those types of people, right? People who are academically smart are the ones that seem to do well in our current system. But humility, hunger, and people smart are more important than academic smarts, which is why Google have stopped looking at people's degrees in their hiring process. They have created their own set of courses that they'd like people to do before they engage with the organization, and that they're not looking at university degrees anymore, because they found that it but in no way indicates a level of competence for people coming in. If you're going to university, I would choose to do things around empathy and psychology and understanding how people work, and drama and sociology and I don't know, cognitive behavioral therapy and NLP and all of those cool things that are actually pretty interesting as well. But it's about being a person who can work with other people. And if you can do that, you're smart anyway. So to answer, I just looked up a couple of the books that I wanted to put in front of you. So one is Mastering Professional Scrum, right? That's by Stephanie Oakman and Stephen Rannell. That's one of the Scrum.org books. So take that one with a pinch of salt. But Turn This Ship Around, David Marquette, that I mentioned before. Managing for Happiness by Jürgen Appello. That's really powerful as well. And I really love, it's not on the reading list, Organize for Complexity by Nils, I can't say his surname. It's Pflaeging. That's why I can't say it, because those letters do not work well in my head. But then I used to not be able to say it in Chimunya, but I can now. But Organize for Complexity is a really powerful book. That's that turning things inside out. And if you really want to have a conversation with people about what really drives them, like create a system that encourages those knowledge workers to be creative and solve problems, you want to read Drive by Dan Pink, which is about the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivators. And our intrinsic motivators as humans is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Once you effectively take our fear of not having a roof over our head and not being able to eat or feed our kids, once you take that off the table, intrinsic motivators kick in. And unfortunately, the existing management practices that are developed, that organizations use, are designed to keep us hungry, not for working well, but for money, because they want to pay us less than we're worth, and we get a bonus if things do well. And that usually means that we struggle a little bit. So it's kind of the wrong level of encouragement. So Drive by Dan Pink is a big one. Turn this ship around. They're really high level ones. Turn this ship around. Give it that to your leadership teams, right? That's the one that will really start change their thinking, because it's a traditional command and control world that it's in. Is there any other questions popped in there? I see we've got some of the books popping into the chat.
No more questions, Martin.
Awesome. Well, I'm quite happy then to, if anybody has any additional questions, they can always hit me up on LinkedIn. Quite often I'll just, if it's a cool question, I'll write a blog post or something and then publish it. I do that sometimes. And obviously keep in touch with Inchiminya as well to know what's happening next.
Let me just put your credentials right there, Martin. Just give me a minute. So there we are, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this session of Agile Education and Awareness. And from all the interesting insights that Martin has shared with us today, please continue joining us for the upcoming workshops. And if you would like to be in touch with Martin for Agile training in leadership, in Scrum, in DevOps, and any other kind of training, please go to his website. Martin, if you could share your website on the chat, and get in touch with me, Bongo Hive, or Martin himself. I would not say more without thanking Bongo Hive for hosting us and making everything possible. Thank you so much, and please continue joining us in these wonderful workshops to educate you about Agile and about agility. Thank you again, and let's keep watching out for these workshops on the Bongo Hive website, on their different platforms. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mark.
All.
Right, and thank you all for coming.